Welcome to Running Hot, Action Network's motorsports betting podcast. I'm your host, Nick Giffen, predictive analyst here at Action Network. And joining me, my co-host, Stephen Young of Roto-Grinders, better known as Stevie TPFL. And this week, we're talking bets for the Food City 500 at Bristol Motor Speedway here on Running Hot. Last weekend at Phoenix, Christopher Bell won in dominant fashion, taking home the win by more than 5 seconds. That's the largest margin of victory in the next-gen era. Chris Buescher came home second, and Ty Gibbs scores his first top 3 finish of his career, rounding out the podium with that third-place finish after having, at times himself, a relatively dominant car at points in the race. But Stevie, we got to brag a little bit here. We had Christopher Bell before practice and qualifying on this podcast as our victory lane pick at 12-1. That makes us 5 for 6 this year on victory lane picks.
Yeah, great start to the season. Hopefully we can keep it going here. Back this week. Glad to be back. Could not speak last week, so that was so much fun, but appreciate you riding solo, giving out the stuff that I had typed up on the sheet. And just, again, we were very in sync last week. We didn't even get to talk, but we were very in sync last week as far as like betting on Toyota early, and it paid off. Yeah. Toyota was the class of the field. You know, we saw all 4 Joe Gibbs cars have a ton of speed. Reddick had a ton of speed. Bubba was fast, but just couldn't get through traffic. Very interesting race. Like Hamlin was like one of the few drivers that got sent to the back with, you know, an issue and drove through the field a little bit. So Toyota was just the class of the field last week, and glad to see Christopher Bell just continue to show up, and makes me feel so good about like Christopher futures that I have because I mean, we're going back to Phoenix for the championship, and if he can get there, it wasn't close. He was the best car qualifying. Like Nick, I don't want this to come off bad, but I feel like he got a little cocky in qualifying. He didn't run the bottom and didn't make it into the final round and didn't cut the dog leg. And it's like, hey, you have the best car. You probably should have tried to take advantage of cutting the dog leg like everybody else. But he had the best car. It wasn't even close.
It's funny to me because a couple times, you know, whether it was strategy or pit problems, he ended up back in the field. So he drove through the field multiple times. I just imagine in that last, you know, really long green flag run where, you know, Christopher Bell started, I think it was around 10th or 11th, ended up winning by more than 5 seconds. Imagine if he had been starting out front, how much he would have won by. He would have been a half a track ahead probably of second place. I'm not even joking. That's how good he was. So just a super dominant win for Christopher Bell. So we've been dominant on our victory lane picks. 5 of 6, like I mentioned. 3 of them are outright winners in double-digit odds. So, you know, I think an 11-1, a 16-1, and a 12-1. So, it was 18-1 on William Byron there. So 3 at double-digit odds. Another one at plus money when we had a top 10 bet on Ty Gibbs. We had our Super Bowl Daytona 500 crossover. So we're doing really well. The only one we missed was Bubba Wallace 22-1 to win Atlanta. And he was right there at the end, pushing those guys who finished, you know, 3 wide across the line right in front of him. So let's keep it rolling, Stevie. Here at Bristol. Speaking of Bristol, it is about a half-mile concrete track. It's pretty steeply banked in the corners. So unlike Martinsville, which is a half-mile track, we get a lot higher speeds here at Bristol. So Stevie, Bristol always one of my favorite tracks. You know, it used to be kind of an action track. It hasn't been as much of an action track lately with, you know, some of the reconfigurations and rework they've done. But now it's made it into a track that the line changes a lot. You might run the bottom for a bit, then you might run the top, and you know, it's certainly evolved over the years in the next gen era. So what kind of racing are we going to see at Bristol?
Well, first of all, I love dirt racing, and I'm very glad we're not going back to the dirt. Dirt is not made for Bristol. I don't know if dirt is made for NASCAR in general, but very happy that it's back to concrete. It's the first time in the next gen era that we're running a daytime race with Bristol. So that obviously is super interesting, and we'll see how that kind of pans out. I don't think it's going to be much different than the night race because like you said, we're probably going to start on the bottom in this race, and the bottom is going to be very dominant. Eventually, the top's going to come in. It's going to be dominant, and then we're probably going to finish with the bottom being dominant again. So we see multiple dominant like lanes throughout the race. And the interesting thing with Bristol is like with the next gen car, we haven't seen like both lanes be dominant at the same time. So it's been one or the other, which is not Bristol from like us growing up watching Bristol.
Yeah.
So love that Bristol just in general is back with the spring race and being on concrete. I love Bristol. It's one of my favorite racetracks to go to just in general. And I think that like it's one of the most unpredictable races as far as just everything that happens. Like you can have a dominant car all day. If you get in trouble on pit road, you lose 2 to 3 laps. If you have an issue, you lose 2 to 3 laps. Like it's a 0.5 mile racetrack, 0.5 through 3. So any little issue makes it a very unpredictable race. And it's been tough to pass the leader with the next gen car here during green flag runs.
Yeah, it certainly has. Passing the leader has been hard. Not impossible, but hard. But you can still make your way through the field. We've seen drivers drive through the field. But like you said, there is a lot of stuff that happens at Bristol. It's 500 laps. It takes a long time to run those 500 laps, even though it's only a little longer than a half-mile track. So it's somewhere between 250 and 300 miles of racing. It still takes a long time because we're not running 170 miles an hour. We're running, in the low 100-mile-an-hour range. So it's a spot where this race will take time to evolve, to develop. Drivers will, like you said, have issues, go laps down. They can make up those laps. Strategy always comes into play at Bristol. We saw, Chris Buescher 2 years ago win with a little bit of strategy play based off the timing of the last caution. So there's a lot that's going on at Bristol, and it's pretty tough for one driver to just like dominate all 500 laps. We're definitely not going to see that. But that leads me into my next question. We've talked so much about the manufacturers this year, the body changes, the body changes to Ford, the body changes to Toyota, which we certainly saw come into play at Phoenix. Do you think there's going to be any irrelevant effect of these body changes or lack thereof on the Chevy side for Bristol?
I don't think so. Maybe like it's tough to say. And, we're going to talk about how we have a lot of leans this week and we're not really betting a ton until we see practice and qualifying. So like, yeah, I think that's in the back of our heads, but I mean, honestly, there's not a ton of value this week in general in the betting market yet. So, but yeah, I mean, overall for me, I don't know if the new body for Toyota or Ford matters too much this weekend. Chevy might actually have an advantage a little bit this weekend because it's like the package that we're running this week is like the intermediate package. It's the same tire we've ran the last 2 years. So like they know exactly what they're getting, but like we go back to even just thinking about Las Vegas and how fast Toyota and Ford was. Maybe Chevy doesn't have like a huge advantage, but I mean, Kyle Larson dominated that race. So
yeah,
I think overall we're going to see who's fast at Bristol is usually who's fast at Bristol. Bristol is a very unique racetrack. And, if you're fast at Bristol, you're usually fast at Bristol. And it really hasn't depended like the type of car, the generation car, the package. If you're fast at Bristol, you're just fast at Bristol. It's a very unique racetrack, and you have to be very good here to be very good here.
Yeah, you kind of answered my next question as well. And so I'll just talk right to that. But my model, the way I do my model, I use something called a feature selection algorithm. So I'm not actually choosing the factors that go into my model. I just have gazillions of factors, and the algorithm itself figures out what are the most important things that make the best predictions of racing at Bristol. And number one and number two were, what are your current form and how do you do at Bristol? That's it. Like that is the bulk of the model. That is more than 90% of the model is those two things. And that's where, like you said, with the manufacturers, I don't think it really matters too much. If you're good at Bristol, you're good at Bristol. We've seen it since 2005, back when Loop Data started, through different transitions of, Gen 4 car of tomorrow, Gen 6, next gen car, all sorts of different aero and engine changes under those years as well, tire combinations. What matters is if you're good at Bristol. And so that's kind of how I'll be handicapping Bristol this weekend, is using mostly current form and how good you've been here in the past. Definitely there's a couple other little things. My model pulls in a very tiny bit of Dover, an even smaller tiny bit of Richmond, which are two tracks where the grooves will change throughout the race. I think is why I think it's interesting that it pulls in Richmond. But when you look at like correlations, Richmond and Dover are pretty highly correlated with Bristol when you just look at a lot of the other tracks. So I thought that was kind of funny, but that's really it. I'm not really considering Dover or Richmond. That's just like the small little like tie-breaking factors I would consider it. But any other ways you're handicapping Bristol, similar tracks, anything else?
Yeah, I mean, if you would think Dover's a mile concrete steep track, and you're like, oh, that should be the racetrack, right?
Yeah.
Sure, it's the closest racetrack, but Martin Truex Jr. dominates Dover, and he stinks at Bristol. So, I mean,
Yep.
and he's one of the best drivers that we have in the whole Cup Series. So, little correlation, like you said, you're the one that like turned me on to Richmond. Was it 2 years ago or something?
Yeah.
So just overall for me, it's Bristol. I'm going to look at Bristol. Sure, I'll throw a little bit of Dover data in there just to kind of get an idea. But the one thing that I will say that is a little interesting as far as like Dover is concerned, it is a daytime race and it's run in April. So that is very similar to what we're dealing with like track conditions wise this weekend, but it's still a mile racetrack. So looking back a little bit on Dover last year, because hey, we've been running Bristol in September for the last few years here since like 2020, and looking at who was good there. You look at a little bit of it. Denny was good there. Bell was good there. Reddick was good there. Martin Truex won the race. Blaney had a lot of speed. And like some of those guys, you're like, all right, well, that correlates to Bristol because, those are some of the guys that are really good at Bristol as well. So maybe a little bit more this week looking at Dover from last year just because we haven't had a day race here in a long time. But again, I'm going to be really focused in on practice and trying to, pinpoint what I'm going to do after practice.
Yeah, no, you do bring up a good point there with Dover last year being the daytime race, and Byron led the most laps, won stage one. Ross Chastain finished second, won stage two. So, but it's all the usual suspects, right? I mean, aside from Truex, who isn't, like you said, who isn't really good at Bristol, it's a lot of the guys that are also just good at Bristol. So, doesn't really change or sway anything that much. But that is our preview of Bristol. That means it is time to dive into some bets. As always, we're going to take you for a lap around Bristol Motor Speedway. That's 4 turns, 1 pick for each of us per turn before we drive into victory lane. So time to wave the flag on the Food City 500 and drive into turn 1. Turn 1, Stevie, where are you leading us off for Bristol?
Hey, I'm going to Toyota right off the bat. Listen, I'm on Toyota again this week. They were the class of the field last year here. I think they ranked first, second, and third in speed, and I think they had like 4 or 5 other drivers inside the top 10 in speed last year. So I'm going to go to Erik Jones, top 10, plus 170. We came into the season going, Erik Jones should be better. Well, we saw it last week. He had top 5 speed last week. They had some issues on pit road. Bubba got into him at one point in the race and kind of ruined his day. But Erik Jones had top 5 speed last week. That's all I needed to see. One race of him having top 5 speed is all I needed to see. He's finished 21st and 24th here at Bristol with the next-gen car. But in 11 career Cup races here, he's finished inside the top 10 in 4 of those races, or 5 of those races, and 4 of those have been really good finishes. So this is one of his best tracks when he was with Joe Gibbs Racing. He has multiple wins here in different series. This is a type of racetrack that Erik Jones dominated at certain points of his career in the Xfinity Series. We go to steep tracks. It's a good track type for him. So I'm going to go to Erik Jones here, plus 170. Fired a 50-1 bet on him to win this race early in the week as a funsy, posted on the Action app, and I tweeted it out as well. But I'm really high on Erik Jones, and I think his top 10 is a lot of value here before practice and qualifying.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I love Erik Jones this weekend. Like you, I did bet Erik Jones outright. I got him 60-1 at the opener. I didn't track it because, like you said, for me it was a funsy bet. It's not when I'm sitting here like I think you should tail me, which is why I didn't track it because I didn't want people to necessarily spend the money on Erik Jones 60-1. But Felt more comfortable after I saw you track it, so that was even better. But my model doesn't have value on this simply because it can't account for the dramatic shift that we probably can see in Legacy Motor Club. So that's also another reason why I didn't track it there. I do not have model value on this, but I like it from an intuitive perspective, how good Erik Jones was here at Bristol when he was with Joe Gibbs Racing. Now he is back in the Toyota camp, not with Joe Gibbs Racing, but, looked very strong last week at Phoenix. So I certainly can get behind this, even though I haven't bet it myself, the top 10 bet specifically. For my turn one pick, I'm going to take Austin Dillon, minus 115 over Corey LaJoie. You can get that at BetMGM as one of their parlayable head-to-head matchups. This is just a spot where Austin Dillon has literally been faster than Corey LaJoie at every single Bristol concrete race. Now, I know a lot of those were when Corey LaJoie was in much more inferior equipment than now, but even in the last two races where Spire has been a lot more competitive in the next gen era, Austin Dillon still faster both in 2022 and in 2023 prior to his issue that put him out of the race, which made him finish behind LaJoie. But it's just a spot where RCR is still better than Spire. So Austin Dillon has the equipment advantage. There's not really a major driver advantage for either one here. When I look at like a driver quality metric where I compare Bristol to all the other tracks throughout the season, that way I'm adjusting for their equipment that season. They're both pretty close. Corey LaJoie technically has the lead there over Austin Dillon, but it's super small. I don't think it's small enough to make up the difference in speed we've seen in the past or the equipment. So it's just a spot here where I just think Austin Dillon is going to be the better overall longer-term play here at Bristol. So I'm going to take him minus 115 over Corey LaJoie.
Yeah, I don't mind this one. I think it's a coin flip. And I think that speed-wise on the track, Austin Dillon. Pit crew strategy, Corey LaJoie. Pit crew performance, Austin Dillon. So, hey, 2 out of 3 to Austin Dillon. So, that's how I look at these head-to-head sometimes. But, we could potentially go to a fourth and say who's the more talented driver. But we'll say that for another day. I don't mind going Austin Dillon here over Corey LaJoie.
Yeah, and my model also has this as pretty solid value. You throw in the current form part of this, and it's kind of a wash, I guess. So, 2 to 3-ish out of 5 ain't bad, I guess, for Austin Dillon here. But I just think based off everything I've seen at Bristol in the next gen era, I'd rather lean Austin Dillon over Corey LaJoie, and not only a lean, I'm making this an actual bet because I want to have something to bet. I've got a lot of leans as we'll talk about. So that is turn 1. We're gonna roll the corner here in turn 2. All right, turn 2, Stevie. I'm intrigued by this one. Give it to us. What do you got in turn 2?
This is all data, man. This is my model just saying we need to get Ty Gibbs somewhere. And the best value was yesterday getting his top 10 at a couple books. I messaged you about it. It was like minus 125 compared to like minus 180 everywhere. Well, it's not available anymore. We don't give out stale picks on the podcast. So I'm going to go to Ty Gibbs for a top 5 pick here. It's plus 240. And my model loves Gibbs. And I was looking through the data, and I went back and looked at Xfinity, and he had a ton of speed at Xfinity steep tracks, and he had a ton of speed at Bristol before he had some issues. Qualified on the pole in an Xfinity Series race. Was so fast last year. He ranked 2nd in speed and 3rd in green flag speed last year at Bristol. Yeah. And a lot of that was track position. But the one thing that we have to remember about Ty Gibbs just in general is he's super aggressive qualifying, and getting track position to start this race is huge. Finished 5th here last year. I'm betting on the talent. I'm betting on just how good Joe Gibbs was here. They ranked 1st, 2nd, and 3rd in speed. I'm betting on Ty Gibbs, and I don't know if I necessarily like the outright before practice and qualifying, but my model loves it, so I'm just going to go top 5 plus 240 here.
We're on the same page here. I'm smiling the whole way through because I was shocked when I ran my model and Ty Gibbs is in the top 5 in win probability.
So I had to go through it, man. I was like skimming through. I was like, why? And
right there, my model likes his 14-1 outright as well. I'm not betting his 14-1 outright. I don't, it's just one of those spots where I can't bring myself to do that. I think I would need a 2 in front of that number probably to bet his outright, but. You've convinced me on the top 5. I also have model value on the top 5. I have them basically 2-1, almost right at 33.3%, a little just a tick over that. So anything down to plus 200, my model is showing value on this, and he's a top 5 driver per my model for this race. It's maybe a little hard to believe, but if yours and mine is showing it, I feel a little bit better about that. Speaking of model value, my turn to pick does show pretty significant model value on this, but I'm still just making this a lean based off the fact that Kaulig Racing has not looked as good as in years past. So I'm going to take AJ Allmendinger top 10 plus 600 as a lean, so not an official pick. This might be one where he shows speed in practice and then goes out and qualifies maybe mediocre, and we could still get a plus 600 after practice and qualifying. So I'm not like rushing to bet this. So right now it's just a lean for me, AJ Allmendinger top 10 plus 600. But hey, I mean, AJ Allmendinger has a top 10 finish at Bristol in the next gen era. So that's already, convincing enough right there, because he finished 7th in 2022 with Kaulig Racing here. But he also has top 10 finishes here in the past when he was with JTG Doherty Racing, which is around that same quality of equipment level as, past years Kaulig Racing, I would say. So this is a track where he's just simply finishing better here, top 10 better here, and the underlying speed stats as well show it. And then go down to the Xfinity Series. Look, he's got a win at Bristol in the Xfinity Series. So I don't, love AJ Allmendinger. I don't think he's going to win this race, but can he finish in the back half of the top 10 better than 1 out of every 7 times? I think so. But right now, I'll kind of wait and see, because those Kaulig cars have been a little bit down on speed relative to the field this year. So I'll wait for practice and qualifying before I reevaluate Dinger.
I don't know if it's necessarily down on speed or if it's just talent in those cars. AJ
that's also a good point, and AJ is talented.
Yeah, I mean, no knock on Daniel Hemrick, but I mean, 500 500 career like NASCAR starts and 1 win in good equipment and multiple series. Like, I don't know, but AJ. Looking back a little bit at Dover last year in the spring race, in that April race, he was like 16th, 17th-ish place car. That's value at 600 here, or 6-1. So I don't mind this at all. But this is one that I definitely think you could wait till practice, and it maybe moves a little bit, unless he's like really fast, and then you're like, oh, I should have bet it early in the week.
Yeah, it's a tough spot there, because if he's really fast, and you're like, darn, but if he's somewhat fast and maybe it moves to 5, I mean, I'm still technically showing value on it at 5-1. So I don't mind taking him 5-1 and having extra data from practice and qualifying to reinforce that decision, because then maybe I'd, have more confidence in that number as well. So AJ Allmendinger, lean, top 10 finish plus 600 for my turn to pick. So those are turns 1 and 2, 2 turns down, 2 turns to go as we drive down the backstretch. But before we drive into turn 3, I want to give you all a quick heads up. North Carolina, home of NASCAR, also now has sports betting. It just launched this past Monday, March 11th. So if you're in the Tar Heel state, take advantage of the best sign-up offers across every sports book. Just follow the link in this episode description. And if you are watching on YouTube, also, below the episode description, make sure to give the thumbs up, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any of the great Action Network content, not just for Running Hot, but across all the sports at the Action Network. All the North Carolina offers, all in one place. Just check out the link in this episode description. Also, I want to remind you, Running Hot is proudly presented by BetMGM. Use bonus code ACTION when signing up to get up to $158 in bonus bets when you bet $5. For new users in Arizona, Colorado, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, and Wyoming. Terms and conditions apply. Must be 21 or older. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Okay, 2 turns down, 2 turns to go. We're going to drive into turn 3. Stevie, turn 3. What do you got for us here?
My turn 3 and turn 4 are very different this week, and I'm going to go to a group bet. We see these from time to time, and not necessarily love these bets, but my model's showing some value in this one, and I personally like this one as well. So we're going to go to a Group B. Group E, Group 2, depending on which site you're looking at, almost all of them are the same. It's Blaney, Buescher, Reddick, and Gibbs. And as much as I like Gibbs, I'm going to go to Buescher here at plus 340. Buescher ranks 4th in speed in the 2 Bristol next-gen races, won the first one. Like you said, a little bit of strategy to win that race. He took 2 tires. Everybody took 4. No one could pass him. Kevin Harvick had to win that race and didn't take 2 tires. Reddick has struggled in both races with the next-gen car. I think Tyler Reddick has the potential to be really good here, but just hasn't put together races yet, so a little concerning. Blaney was one of the best cars before he had an issue in 2022. They completely whiffed last year. Don't know what was going on. It was an elimination race. They had so many issues that he's like, please tell me I'm not in danger. I can't do anything. I just need to move up. And they, as many issues as like people had, he was fine. Gibbs was one of the best cars here. We talked about that. My model is showing value on Buescher and Gibbs. I have a top 10 or top 5 bet on Gibbs, so I'm going to take Buescher here at plus 340 and hope that we get the double with Gibbs finishing in the top 5 and Buescher finishing in the ahead of Gibbs in the top 5 as well.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, and I'm not on this simply because my model is super high on Ryan Blaney. He's 3rd in win probability. So, just a little bit different, but certainly I can definitely see where you're coming from. And the thing about Chris Buescher, he's super consistent. He doesn't go out and make mistakes. He doesn't drive in over his head. And that's going to be important at a track like Bristol, where you have a lot of speed, but also you're not making mistakes. You're not getting into messes. You're not getting into other people's messes. He's not really a guy that beats and bangs on the track. So he's not really going to get retaliated against or, involved in other people's business. So that is another factor that always goes in his favor here at Bristol when you're considering handicapping, these other little subtle edges that we don't really capture in models. So Stevie's turn 3 pick, Chris Buescher to win his group. For my turn 3 pick, speaking of Chris Buescher, he's one of the guys I'm looking at to win the race. So I'm just going to take the whole Ford camp. You can get this out there at plus 315. I've seen a plus 300, seen a plus 290. I would bet it at all of those, which means we need around 25% win probability for Ford to win this race to be like break even at plus 300, a little bit less if you're at plus 315, a little bit more if you're at plus 290. But again, I'll make the case why I'm showing value on all those. To get to 25% win probability in my model, all I need are 4 Ford drivers. I need Ryan Blaney, Brad Keselowski, Joey Logano, and Chris Buescher. That already puts me above 25% win probability in my model. Then we add in a guy like Chase Briscoe, who I bet outright at 100-1. I'm showing a little bit of value there on Briscoe. Noah Gragson, he's looked amazing so far this year with several runs inside the top 10 or near the top 10 this past weekend at Phoenix. He definitely had a chance to finish inside the top 10, and this is one of Gregson's best tracks. Michael McDowell finished 6th here last year. Todd Gilliland, this has been one of his best tracks in his career, to top 20 finishes in the 2 Bristol concrete races. So I'm not saying he's going to win, but we're talking just added win probability here on like these super duper long shot chances. I'm above 28% on this for Ford winning, which is why I like plus 300, plus 290 as well. So I'm going to go with Ford to win this race at plus 315.
Yeah, I don't mind this. Toyota should be the dominant manufacturer this weekend, but like you said, we're playing the percentage game here at plus 315, and Gragson could be that like sleeper this week. He showed speed, and the last couple of weeks they've been on good strategy. He's taking care of his equipment. Like, he might be the most talented driver in the Stewart Haas camp now. Like, it's really interesting. So I think Gregson's really interesting. He's someone that I have circled to watch in practice and qualifying and kind of make some decisions on if I want to get some Gragson bets, because it's like right on the value line for him, but I want to see practice and qualifying for him. But yeah, I mean, you're getting this with Buescher, Kez, Logano, Blaney, and like you said, adding in Briscoe and Gragson.
Yeah, exactly. So you're mostly relying on those 6, I would say, to win. Maybe there's a weird scenario where Michael McDowell takes 2 tires at the end and everybody else takes 4 and wins the race or something. But still, I'm getting about 25% just on those 2 RFK drivers and those 2 Penske drivers, not counting Austin Cindric there. So turn 3, I'm going to take Ford plus 315 to win the race. Stevie with his Chris Buescher bet. That means we got one last corner to get through, and that's turn 4. Final turn, Stevie. Where are we going with this one?
This is probably my favorite bet early in the week. And it's so interesting because, like, I don't know. I can't tell you the last time I bet an odd or even race number outside of Daytona and Talladega. So I'm going to go to the car number of race winner odd minus 125. And like I said, I don't typically mess with this bet. I whatever number is better at Daytona or Talladega, I'll take shots on it. But I'm showing this as like one of the biggest plus EV bets of the week. 4 of the top 5 cars in the next gen era at Bristol have been odd number cars. You know, odd number cars have won 3 straight times. My model has Hamlin, Larson, and Bell as the clear-cut favorites. Bell's an even. But even if we like extend that, 7 of the top 10 cars in the 2 races here at Bristol have been odd number race cars. You know, we've talked a lot about who we're potentially playing and who we like this week. Well, I mean, think about it. Chris Buescher, Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott, Denny Hamlin. We talked about Michael McDowell. Ross Chastain's an odd number. Like, Ty Gibbs, a lot of odd number race cars that are really fast
Ty
here.
Gibbs
and it's
is even.
like, even, you're right.
54.
54. Like his 19 was throwing me off because yeah. But overall, just looking at this, it just seems like the spot to attack. And I love the odd numbers here. And a lot of, I mean, coming into the weekend, I think Larson's the favorite. Hamlin's right there and Bell's right there. So I'm getting 2 of those 3 drivers at minus 125. And I think that this is a good number.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. My model itself kind of, you know, it doesn't love this, I would say. I think it's okay with it. For me, you know, I've got Christopher Bell second in my model here. Like I mentioned, I've got Ty Gibbs 5th. I have Brad Keselowski 6th. I have Ryan Blaney 3rd. So I've got a lot of even at the top, but I've got Joey Logano up there, William Byron up there. But after that, it's a ton of odd numbers. I'd have to go down to Kyle Busch and Alex Bowman as my next even number drivers. And then even after that, it's just like odd. Other than, again, maybe the wild card, Noah Gragson or Chase Briscoe. So it's close for me. I technically favor even a little bit. Your model favors odd a little bit, but your model is definitely higher on certain drivers than my model is. You know, my model is definitely higher on Ryan Blaney than yours. It's definitely higher on Joey Logano than yours, whereas yours is higher on Chris Buescher than mine, for example. So that's where our discrepancies kind of come into play. So, you know, it's interesting. We don't always have to agree on everything. And in this case, I think I'm gonna go different from you here, Stevie, and I'm gonna say I wouldn't make that bet, but I totally understand why you would make that bet. So, Stevie, car number of race winner odd minus 125. I hope you smoke me on this one, make me look dumb, because I want to win bets.
I don't ever want to make you look dumb. I also like you said though, my model is not high on Ryan Blaney. I like Blaney at Bristol. Right. My model is just down on him. I think it's factoring in last year a lot. It's factoring in the issues from the year before, but your model is way higher than Blaney, and I think that is one of the reasons that we're seeing such a huge difference in this one.
Yeah, Blaney was number 1 in my flags metric for 2022 prior to him popping a tire. So that, you know, he started 6th, drove all the way up past Eric Almirola for the lead. Yep. Eric Almirola started on pole, led all the laps until Blaney passed him. Then Blaney came out of the pits in 10th because a few guys stayed out. And drove all the way back up to 5th before his tire blew. So Blaney was awesome in 2022. And out of 9 races with Team Penske on Bristol Concrete, he's had 7 dominant performances. If we count that race as a dominant performance, which, in terms of the numbers, it doesn't look like it because he led only 6 laps or whatever and finished way down there. But he had the dominant car in that race up to the point where he had his issues. So 7 out of 9 relatively dominant performances with Team Penske at Bristol. So that's why I like Blaney. I think that's part of why my model likes him as well. But for my turn 4 pick, we're kind of getting a little rambly here. I'm going to lean Brad Keselowski to win at plus 1,400. I mentioned I have him 6th in my model. So I did bet Brad Keselowski earlier in the week at 20-1. But by the time it was available outside of Nevada, it had moved down to 16-1. So I tracked it at 16. Still like it. It definitely would be a full-fledged bet at 16. But now the best available that I see is 14-1. So I wouldn't bet Brad Keselowski necessarily at 14-1. My model does show value on it. Talked to my good friend Jim Sonis, and his model doesn't quite have value on this one. So for me, I like doing the model averaging thing. So this is just gonna be a lean on Brad Keselowski, but he's had a damn good car here each of the next gen races. He was the guy to beat until that caution that created the caution that allowed Chris Buescher to win the race 2 years ago in 2022. Brad Keselowski was well on his way to victory there. He was dominating that race, and he's good at all these other tracks that matter too, Bristol, Richmond, etc. Dover and Richmond. So I like Brad Keselowski to win this at 14-1, but just a lean at this point.
You know who won the last spring race here when it was concrete, right?
Brad Keselowski.
Yeah, Brad Keselowski in 2020. Yeah, it was a May race, so it technically wasn't like as early, but the last day race we had was right after all the COVID stuff happened, and Brad won that race. He has 3 career wins at Bristol on the concrete oval, and like you said, he's good at Bristol. If you're good at Bristol, you're up there for me, and Brad Keselowski is definitely someone I'm looking at going into this weekend.
All right, so turn 4 is complete. We've crossed the start-finish line. We're going to go to Victory Lane. Steve, we're going to try to make it 6 for 7 on Victory Lane picks this year. That would be a tough task to do that all with plus money bets. So where are we going for Victory Lane?
Oh, to one of the most tilting drivers in the entire field, but both of us are showing value on this. It's Ricky Stenhouse Jr., top 10, plus 420. Got to love us some Ricky. I love Ricky anytime that we go to a short, steep track, and the upside's there. You're gambling a little bit, but I'm showing value here at plus 420. He finished 10th last year. He was one of the best cars in the last 150 laps last year. So we're kind of betting on him to build off of that, plus his good track history, and hopefully they can build off of that. He has 7 top 10 finishes in 19 career races here. I mean, I'm showing value. I know you're showing value, and like you said, let's keep it rolling here. 6 for 7. Let's get Stenhouse in the top 10 to finish this race.
Yeah, I'm definitely showing value here, and I'm a sucker for betting Ricky Stenhouse Jr. at Bristol. I always have been, always will be. This is his best track of any track on the circuit. And, like you said, finished 10th last year, was one of the best cars on track towards the end of the race. And we get that consistency, like you mentioned, from Chevy, where they're not bringing a new body. So they know what they've got here, and they can kind of build off of that. And so, that could be a good thing here for Ricky Stenhouse Jr. as well. So Victory Lane pick Ricky Stenhouse Jr. top 10 finish at plus 420. We'll round it out for us. Thank you for listening to the Food City 500 episode of Running Hot, Action Network's motorsports betting podcast. We'll be back this time next week as we talk about bets for the Echo Park Automotive Grand Prix at Circuit of the Americas. On behalf of my co-host, Stephen Young, thanks again for listening. We'll see you back here next week on Running Hot from Action Network.